is Hidden Killers with Tony Brueski. Here now, Tony Brueski.
There's something strange about silence in a courtroom that never got used. The Idaho courtroom that was supposed to hold Bryan Kohberger's trial. The stage for months of evidence, testimony, and confrontation. The microphone never switched on. The exhibits never flickered across the screen. The jury never saw a single frame of what the state had prepared to prove. And yet, piece by piece, those materials are now leaking out. Not as spectacle, but as a slow, grim inventory of what the public missed when the plea deal shut the door. When prosecutors first laid out their case plan, it was clinical by design. The DNA, the cell phone trail, and the white Hyundai Elantra. No grand motive narrative, no melodrama, just proof. In newly unsealed filings, we can see how they meant to do it. Exhibit logs show nearly 500 potential pieces of evidence, crime scene photos, maps of the King Road house, recorded interviews, 911 call transcripts, and hours of body cam footage. Some of it will remain sealed forever, and that's a good thing. An October 1st order barred the release of any image showing a victim's body or blood, calling them too prejudicial, too invasive. And there's no reason we need to see them. But what's left paints a chilling, methodical picture. The knife sheath found beside Maddie Mogen's body carried a single male DNA profile, the genetic match that investigators say broke the case open. Digital evidence mapped Kohberger's phone traveling towards Moscow the night of November 12th into the early hours of November 13th, before it briefly vanished from the network between 2:47 and 4 a.m., reappearing moments after the murders, heading back towards Pullman. Surveillance cameras captured a white Hyundai Elantra circling the neighborhood, headlights cutting through the early morning fog. Those are the cornerstones the jury would have seen. Then came the human side, the brutality described in autopsy summaries, now partially unsealed this month. Xanokernodal, more than 50 stab wounds, and fractured bones of the skull. Maddie Mogen defensive wounds and the unmistakable hilt imprint of a knife pressed into her chest. Kaylee Gonzalez grievous facial wounds, and Ethan Chapin struck with what examiners call frenzied force. It's almost impossible to read, even now. But those details underscore how prosecutors were building the death penalty argument before the plea deal erased it. There were also the quiet pieces, things that add texture but never make headlines. Unsealed police memos describe strange activity at the house in the weeks before the murders. The front door found ajar, noises upstairs, a sense of being watched. Those records meant to establish premeditation, that whoever planned this knew that door, that layout, and those habits. All of it. Years of digital breadcrumbs, DNA work, and forensic reconstructions now exists as paper, not testimony. A story that could prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, but will never be tested in front of 12 people sworn to listen. The newly released witness list reads more like a map of Kohberger's collapsing world. Prosecutors didn't plan to call his parents. They were never central. But his sister Amanda was. Her name appears on the state's October 11th filing, just days before her brother suddenly agreed to 4 consecutive life sentences. The state said she would testify about his behavior before and after the killings, how he acted the summer he moved to Pullman, and again that December when he returned to Pennsylvania. She wasn't going to accuse him of anything. She was there for context. Still, the symbolism is hard to ignore. The family name inside the witness box. And then came the professors from Washington State University. John Snyder, the criminology teacher for whom Kohberger worked as a teaching assistant, told investigators his student was rigid, argumentative, socially off-putting. Snyder said he'd considered removing him from the program before the arrest ever happened. You have Amelia Pedno, another professor, told police she worried about how Kohberger treated female students and that he'd once emailed her about a paper, The Charisma of Evil, Ted Bundy, and the Study of Psychopathy. According to newly unsealed campus records, Kohberger downloaded that paper 3 times from the university archive. That detail now feels a little prophetic because if the trial had gone forward, prosecutors intended to draw that line. A fascination with Bundy that went beyond academic curiosity. Photos recovered from Kohberger's phone show him hiking near Mount Rainier, the same area where Bundy dumped at least one victim in 1974. In one selfie, his expression is eerily deliberate. Behind him, a memorial stone marking the mountain's first climb. Investigators noticed the framing. Too deliberate to be chance. The Bundy parallels. Mount Rainier, the sorority house attack, the targeting of women, all would have helped the state argue motive without ever saying a word. And while prosecutors assembled that pattern of life, the defense had its own army of specialists waiting in the wings. 16 experts, DNA, cell phone forensics, crime scene reconstructionists, computer analysis, even a psychiatrist. Their strategy was clear from discovery filings. Dismantle the state's forensics and imply more than one weapon, more than one person, without an alibi. It was the only path left. The trial would have been a brutal chess match, science versus suggestion. Instead, a signature on a plea deal ended the game before the first move. Buried among the pretrial records is a small but revealing file, the psychological evaluation commissioned by the defense. Dr. Eileen Ryan, a forensic psychiatrist at Ohio State University, was hired to study Kohberger's family dynamic. She interviewed his parents and 2 sisters, both individually and as a group, in late of 2024. Why the family? Because the defense needed to humanize him, to argue that obsession, not evil, drove him. Ryan specializes in obsessive-compulsive disorder. Her notes mention ritualistic organization, control fixation, and interpersonal rigidity. The most interesting part isn't what she said about Bryan, it's what she didn't. She focused almost entirely on the women in his life, his mother, Marianne, and his sisters, Amanda and Melissa. His father didn't get an individual session. Psychologists who reviewed the structure say that choice suggests the defense was exploring how his relationships with women formed or fractured long before the murders. It's also worth noting Kohberger's mother once wrote an opinion piece criticizing the death penalty and used Ted Bundy as her example. Prosecutors had that article in their mitigation file. They likely would have used it to challenge any argument that her son was misunderstood rather than malignant. In a trial, that small essay could have become one of the most haunting pieces of irony in recent memory. Now, instead of the courtroom, we get the slow paperwork of a man adjusting to permanent confinement. At Idaho Maximum Security Institution, Kohberger is in administrative segregation. A single cell, minimal contact. The October 20th grievance log, released through public records request, shows 9 complaints in 2 months. Temperature too low, portions too small, correction staff failing to follow policy. Staff describe him as precise, insistent, and argumentative. The same words professors once used. Earlier this month, state officials finally named the employee who leaked surveillance video of him pacing his cell and performing push-ups. That worker resigned. No criminal charges. Since then, the Department of Correction has implemented a single-channel communications rule, meaning no one can speak to media without approval. It's an institutional muzzle born from embarrassment. Meanwhile, prosecutors refiled a 99-year no-contact order forbidding Kohberger from any communication with the victims' families. Not letters, not emails, not proxy messages through third parties. The family supported it unanimously. And inside prison, he's kept off all programming lists. No group therapy, no work detail. Officials told NBC News he spends most hours reading case law, filing written corrections to procedural memos, and requesting more legal pads. It's the same personality loop. Control through paperwork. Even in isolation, he's still trying to win arguments no one is having. The plea deal spared Idaho the cost and chaos of a death penalty trial, but it also sealed off one of the things people crave most in cases like this: truth in sequence. Trials don't just convict, they explain. They show us how the pieces fit together, and they force both sides to confront each other under light. Now what we get are the drips of redacted evidence, professors' recollections, and FOIA documents that read like fragments of a confession we'll never hear. The October unseals gave us enough to know what the state had. DNA that anchored the story. Witnesses ready to describe his social unraveling. Psychological evaluations that hint at obsession. And a digital trail that caught him circling the victim's house again and again. But what they can't give us is a why. The human motive that a prosecutor can only unpack on a witness stand where evidence becomes narrative. Instead, Kohberger's life has moved from courtroom to cell block, a controlled environment where he can argue with no one but the walls. He'll spend decades cataloging grievances, debating regulations, maybe one day writing about justice from the inside. The irony is that for a man who studied criminology, he's now become a textbook. His own case cited in lectures he'll never hear. And the rest of us are left reading footnotes to a trial that never happened. Evidence locked away, witnesses never sworn, a fascination with Ted Bundy left to speculation, and redacted photos. In the end, Bryan Kohberger's story didn't close with a verdict. It simply stopped. A freeze frame of a system that proved its point without saying a single word. Give me your thoughts in the comments. I keep going back to, should they have gone forward with this trial? Should they have put more restrictions on the plea deal? I'd say without a doubt the second. They should have forced him to explain in the same way BTK did. They gave him way too much grace and allowed him to slip into the cracks of the prison system without having to face the bright light of reality. And give him a chance to collapse in front of all of us. But would he have? That would have been the risk. Because if you look at the BTK case, another one that he studied, modeled himself after in some ways, that confession in that courtroom in Wichita, it was cold. It was calculated, and it showed no remorse. Would that have been the best thing for those families? Or what took place, the confrontation that they were able to make with him, especially Olivia? Still, that's, I think, the best moment of the year in terms of courtroom theatrics and raw emotion coming to the surface. Maybe that was the best. Give me your thoughts in the comments section. If you're not already there, search Hidden Killers with Tony Brueski. You'll find us on YouTube, and you can comment there. Make that same search wherever you get podcasts and take us with you wherever you go. And hit subscribe, please. Until next time, I'm Tony Brueski. We'll talk again.
Want more on this case and others? Then press subscribe now and don't miss a moment of true crime coverage from Tony Brueski and the Hidden Killers podcast.